had always been the one holding everything together, the quiet force behind every polished family gathering, every holiday dinner, every perfectly folded towel. I was the mother who anticipated needs before anyone else noticed them, who placed fresh flowers on the table no one complimented, who vanished into the kitchen once the guests arrived. That was my role, invisible but necessary. Grace, mother of 3. Grace the fixer. Grace the dependable one. Over time I had stopped being anything else. I couldn't remember the last time someone asked me what I wanted. Maybe that's why, when Leah called that Monday morning with fake excitement in her voice, I already knew what was coming. "Ivy got the promotion," she practically squealed. "We're throwing her a celebration Friday night." "That's wonderful," I said, and I meant it. Ivy was the youngest, the most ambitious. She'd worked hard. I'd love to be there. There was a pause on the line, the kind that felt heavier than silence. My stomach tightened. "Well, actually, Mom," Leah hesitated. "It's going to be a professional crowd. You know, Ivy's colleagues, her boss. Very formal." I stayed quiet, even though my heart started pounding. "We do need your help setting up, though," she added quickly. "No one sets a table like you do." My knuckles whitened around the phone. So I wasn't invited. Not really. Before I could speak, Jean and Ivy joined the call. They talked over each other, listing things they needed from me. The crystal glasses, the gold-rimmed plates, the little canapes everyone loved. I found myself nodding even though no one could see me. "Yes, of course," I heard myself say. After the call ended, I sat in the quiet of my kitchen, staring at the worn wooden table that had seen 30 years of family breakfasts and birthday cakes. That familiar ache bloomed in my chest again. Needed but not wanted. Useful but not included. The rest of the week passed in a blur of instructions and reminders. Iron the napkins, don't forget the vase, chill the canapes. Each message felt like a tiny paper cut. I followed every instruction like I always had. I packed everything into neat boxes, chilled the food, polished the glasses. I didn't miss a single detail. By Friday morning I was dressed in my helper clothes. Dark slacks, a plain blouse, something that wouldn't draw attention. As I gathered the last box, I turned on the television just for background noise. That's when I saw her. A woman about my age, walking barefoot along a beach in Portugal. Her silver hair shining in the sun. She looked free. The narrator's voice drifted through the room. Asterisk. It's never too late to choose yourself. Asterisk. It was just a commercial. Travel ad. But I stood frozen, heart pounding. Something inside me cracked open. I opened my laptop. My fingers trembled. I searched flights. There was one leaving that very evening. I stared at the screen. This is insane, I thought. I can't just leave. But why couldn't I? My daughters were grown. They had homes, jobs, lives. They didn't need me. They just needed what I could do for them. Before I could think too hard, I clicked purchase. The confirmation email arrived in seconds. Strangely, I didn't feel guilt or fear. I felt something I hadn't in years. Freedom. I packed lightly. A few clothes, my passport, medications, and one camera I hadn't used in decades. I left the boxes stacked neatly by the door and wrote a note to place on top. I've chosen myself this time. As the taxi pulled away from my house, my phone started buzzing. Leah. Then Jean. Then Ivy. Texts piled in. Asterisk, Mom, where are you? Asterisk. Asterisk. It's almost 4 o'clock. Asterisk. Asterisk. Guests will be here in 2 hours. Asterisk. I silenced the phone and stared out the window. My neighborhood slipped past like a memory. I took the deepest breath I had taken in 30 years. I was terrified. I was exhilarated. For the first time in my life I was choosing Maid at the airport. Everything felt surreal. I moved through security as if in a dream, my carry-on light in my hand, my chest heavier than ever. When I boarded the plane, I didn't allow myself to look back, not even once. I didn't want second thoughts. I didn't want to remember the look Ivy gave me the last time she'd asked me to help and I dropped everything, just like always. I didn't want to feel the guilt I knew would creep in if I let it. I sat in my seat, clutched the armrests as the plane rolled down the runway, and closed my eyes the moment it lifted into the air. And for the first time in years I slept. No racing thoughts, no mental checklist, no responsibilities. Just sleep. When I woke up, the captain was announcing our descent into Lisbon. Morning light shimmered on the surface of the Tejo River below, and something in my chest stirred. I couldn't tell if it was fear or excitement. Maybe both. Maybe that was the point. I hadn't booked a hotel. That had never been my way. I was always the planner. Plan A, B, and backup C. But now I just stood at the curb outside the airport, suitcase in hand, breathing in foreign air that tasted of salt and possibility. A woman with kind eyes and silver-streaked hair offered me a ride. Her English was careful but clear. "First time in Lisboa?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "First time anywhere in many years." She smiled. "Then welcome to your new beginning." She took me to a small pension in the Alfama district. "Simple," she said. "Clean. With a view of the river." It was perfect. The room was barely bigger than a closet. A single bed, a tiny desk, and a window that opened onto a sea of red-tiled rooftops tumbling toward the blue water. I stood there for a long time, breathing it in. The smell of grilling sardines wafted up from the street below. The sounds of church bells and seagulls echoed in the distance. Smiled. Not the polite smile I wore for my daughters. Real one. Free. That first day, I didn't try to do anything. I just walked. Got lost in narrow cobblestone streets. Wandered past painted buildings in faded yellows and pinks. I sat alone at a cafe, eating a flaky pastel de nata that melted on my tongue, and sipped strong Portuguese coffee that somehow didn't keep me up at night. I listened to conversations I couldn't understand, watched people who didn't know me, and slowly, I began to feel something I hadn't in years. Present. At night, I returned to the tiny room and slept like the dead. No one needed me. No one expected anything. I was just race. The days passed like that. Walk. I wandered into a bookstore on a rainy afternoon and found myself flipping through a black and white photography book. And suddenly something stirred. A version of me I hadn't thought about in decades. The girl who once saved for a camera. The girl who took night classes. The girl who dreamed of capturing the world. That night I bought a cheap digital camera. It wasn't much, but it fit perfectly in my hands. Solid. Familiar. The next morning I started shooting. Laundry flapping between balconies. Children chasing pigeons. Elderly men playing chess under trees. The tiles of a chapel wall glowing in golden light. And as I framed each photo, as I saw the world through that tiny lens again, I realized I wasn't just documenting Lisbon. I was slowly reassembling myself. By the end of the second week, I felt like I had lived a lifetime away from home. Each click of my camera had pulled me further from the woman I used to be. The woman who folded laundry at midnight, who ironed tablecloths until her hands ached, who was always one text away from obligation. I had become someone else. Someone quieter inside but fuller. Stronger. I still hadn't called my daughters. Not because I didn't miss them, I did. But because I didn't know how to explain that this wasn't a breakdown. It was a breakthrough. Eventually I sent a single message to all three. Asterisk, I am safe. I need time for myself. Please respect that. Asterisk. Then I turned off my phone again and tucked it into a drawer. I took the train to Porto the next morning. The pension owner in Lisbon had called the city magical, and she was right. The landscape shifted as we moved north. Lush hills, terraced vineyards, rivers glinting beneath ancient bridges. I watched it all through the train window, camera in hand, heart wide open. In Porto, I rented a room in a guest house overlooking the Douro River. On my first night I took a boat ride. The city lights blinked on as the sky faded to indigo. A German couple offered to take my picture. When the woman asked, "Are you traveling alone?" I surprised myself by smiling. "Yes," I replied. "Just me." She tilted her head and said, "How brave." No one had ever called me that before. Back home I had been reliable, predictable, responsible. but never brave. That night I had dinner alone, grilled fish and vinho verde at a tiny restaurant. The waiter, an older man with kind eyes, asked if I was American. Yes, I said. On a journey to find myself. He didn't laugh. He simply nodded and replied, "The best journey of all." The next morning my phone buzzed. I almost ignored it, but something made me check. It was an email from Leah. Subject line: Asterisk, Dad is trying to take control of everything. Asterisk. My breath caught. I opened it with trembling hands. The message was short, but every word landed like a stone. Asterisk, Mom, please call us. Dad's saying you abandoned the family. He's filing for divorce again. He says you're unstable. He wants the house. Asterisk. My coffee turned bitter in my mouth. Richard. My ex-husband had been out of the picture for years. Gone since Ivy was 12, off to play house with his secretary. He'd barely kept in touch. And now, suddenly, he was back, claiming I was unstable. I stared out the window at the river, mind racing. The freedom I had felt these past weeks now felt shaky under my feet. Was I selfish for leaving? Had I let my daughters down? Was I really abandoning them? I couldn't sleep that night. I paced the small room, torn between who I was becoming and the role I'd always played. Should I go back? Should I fight? By dawn I knew. Yes, I would go home. But not because Richard was calling the shots. And not because I was afraid. I would return because I had something to protect. My daughters, my peace, and the new woman I had worked so hard to find. So I booked a flight for 1 week later. 7 more days to stand tall, breathe deeply, and gather the strength I would need. Because something told me Richard wasn't after just the house. And this battle was only beginning. The final days in Porto were a mixture of peace and quiet dread. I wandered the steep cobblestone streets with my camera, capturing everything from laundry dancing in the wind to the mosaic patterns beneath my feet. The barista at the corner cafe began greeting me by name. The sun on my skin, the river breeze in my hair, the weight of the camera in my hands. It all felt like a world I belonged in. And yet, I could feel the storm waiting for me back home. The day before my flight, I called Leah. Her voice cracked with relief the moment she heard mine. "Mom. Oh my God. Is it really you?" "It's me," I said gently. "I'm coming home tomorrow. Thank goodness. Everything's a mess. Dad's been—" "I know," I cut in, trying to steady her. "But before we talk about that, there's something I need you to understand." I paused. "I'm not coming back as the woman who left," I continued. "I've changed, Leah. I'm still your mother. And I love you girls more than anything, but I'm also Grace. And I'm coming back on my terms." There was a silence on the other end. Then quietly, "Okay. I think I understand. But Mom, you should know. Dad's saying horrible things about you. He's telling everyone you had a breakdown." Course he was. Richard had always known how to twist a story, how to plant doubt like a weed and let it grow. He'd done it when he left us, somehow convincing mutual friends that I was the reason. Too intense, too controlling, too focused on the girls. As if being a devoted mother was a flaw. "Let him talk," I said calmly. "Those who know me will see the truth." After we hung up, I returned to my room and unpacked the small envelope of photographs I had developed during the trip. Shots of Lisbon and Porto, yes, but also of me. Grace standing by the water. Grace laughing in a cafe. Grace looking straight at the camera with clear, steady eyes. I barely recognized her. And yet she felt more me than I'd ever been. The flight home was long, and my doubts returned during the endless hours over the ocean. What if Richard had already turned the girls against me? What if my silence had been the final crack that pushed them away? But as I stepped off the plane and saw Leah waiting for me at arrivals, her eyes tired but her arms open, I knew I'd done the right thing. "You look different," she said, stepping back to take me in. "I am different," I replied, touching my shorter hair. "It's natural gray exposed now, no more dye, no more pretense." In the car, Leah filled me in. Richard had wormed his way in quickly, showing up at Ivy's apartment the night of the failed party, pretending to care, pretending to be the steady parent. Within days he was talking about money, inheritance, and the house. He said since you left the family home, he has rights to it, she explained. He even had a lawyer call us. Clenched my jaw. The house is mine. It always was. I bought it with money from my parents. He never contributed a cent. He's saying you're unstable, she said, almost in a whisper. That you weren't of sound mind when you signed the divorce papers. That the settlement is invalid. I almost laughed. And he's the picture of stability, right? The man who ran off with his secretary and forgot birthdays for 5 straight years. Leah looked at me then, and I saw the fear there. Not just about Richard but about me. About whether I could handle what was coming. Where are we going? I asked, realizing we weren't heading toward my house. To Jean's. We're all staying there for now. He's at your house. He still has an old key. I sat up straighter. He's what? He said he was just checking on things, but then he just stayed. That was the final straw. Take me to the house, I said, my voice low but firm. Mom, I don't think that's a good idea. He's been drinking a lot and his lawyer's there too. I don't care if he has the entire Supreme Court in there, I said. It's my house. And I'm going home. Leah changed direction without another word. As we pulled up to the driveway, I saw the lights blazing in every room, music pounding from inside, and Richard's car parked beside a sleek black sedan I didn't recognize. I stepped out of the car slowly, my back straight. The woman who had left this house a month ago would have hesitated, would have tried to keep the peace to avoid conflict. But that woman was gone. I walked up the path, climbed the steps, and rang the doorbell. My doorbell. After a few seconds, the door swung open. Richard stood there, drink in hand, leaning casually against the frame like he belonged there. He looked exactly the same. Tall, aging but charming, with that rehearsed smile that never quite reached his eyes. Grace, he said, feigning surprise. So, the wanderer returns. I didn't flinch. I'd like you to leave my house. His smile twitched. Your house. I'm not sure you're in a position to make demands. After all, you disappeared. Abandoned your family. Our daughters were distraught. I felt Leah behind me, her body tense, watching us both. Our daughters are grown women, Richard, I said evenly. And yes, this is my house, as stated clearly in our divorce settlement. Now, please get your things and go. Before he could respond, a man stepped into view behind him. Polished, suited, with a snake-like expression. Is there a problem here? He asked, sizing me up. Mark, this is Grace, Richard said smoothly. Grace, meet Mark Donovan, my attorney. He's helping me look into how the assets were unfairly divided during our divorce. I nearly laughed. Unfair. Richard, you got everything you wanted, your freedom, your new life. I got what was left. I stepped forward. But if you think for a second you're walking back into this house and rewriting history, you're mistaken. Richard's voice darkened. And if I don't leave? What are you going to do? Call the police and tell them you abandoned your property and now you're upset that someone took care of it? I turned slightly toward Leah but kept my voice steady. No, I won't call the police. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. I'll call Jason Reynolds. Richard's face paled. Jason had been our divorce attorney, and the man who held sealed evidence of Richard's financial misconduct. Evidence we'd agreed never to use, as long as Richard upheld his end of the deal. You're bluffing, Richard said, but his voice cracked. Try me, I said, locking eyes with him. I've changed. I'm not afraid of you anymore. The silence that followed was thick with tension, decades of power struggles and control games hovering between us. Then, surprisingly, it was Mark who spoke first. Perhaps we should discuss this later, he said, placing a firm hand on Richard's shoulder. When everyone's rested. Fine, Richard muttered, slamming back the rest of his drink. But this isn't over. He and Mark disappeared upstairs, gathering their things with the grace of bitter defeat. I stood silently, watching them. The house around me felt tainted, cluttered with liquor bottles, ashtrays, and filth. Photos from the mantel had been replaced by beer cans. The smell of stale smoke clung to the walls. When they finally left, brushing past me without another word, I turned to Leah. "I'm so sorry, Mom," she said, her voice tight with guilt. "We should have stopped him somehow." I placed a hand on her cheek, and to my surprise my hand was steady. "It's not your fault. None of this is. It's between your father and me." She nodded, eyes shiny with tears. "Call your sisters," I said softly. "Tell them I'm home. I want to see them tomorrow. We need to talk." After Leah left, I stood alone in my living room. The house was quiet, but it wasn't peaceful. It had been violated. Still, something inside me was calm. I climbed the stairs, half expecting to find Richard had taken over my bedroom too. But to my surprise it was untouched, as if even he hadn't dared to cross that line. I unpacked slowly, placing my camera on the nightstand like a declaration. I was back, but not as the woman who left. Tomorrow I would speak to my daughters. Tomorrow I would find out the truth about what Richard had really been up to. And tomorrow, I would decide whether coming home had been the end of my journey, or the beginning of something even bigger. I woke early the next morning, jet lag still tugging at the edges of my mind. For a few seconds I forgot where I was. I expected to see the narrow window from my Lisbon room, to hear distant church bells and the faint smell of espresso drifting through old stone. Instead, I saw beige walls, an overgrown backyard, and my bedroom in its usual stillness. But not the same. I brewed coffee and stepped out onto the back porch. The small garden I'd once tended with care had grown wild in my absence. Weeds twisted through the flower beds, roses stretched untamed toward the sky. Yet, as I sipped from my mug, I found beauty in that wildness. It wasn't perfect anymore, but it was alive. So was I. Just after 9, the doorbell rang. All 3 of my daughters stood there, Leah, Jean, and Ivy, each carrying a different kind of nervousness in her eyes. Leah, ever the peacemaker. Jean, practical and skeptical. And Ivy looked like she hadn't slept. "Come in," I said, holding the door wide. "I made coffee." They followed me into the kitchen quietly. No one mentioned the mess left by Richard. No one asked why I hadn't cleaned it. That would come later. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one where I'd once helped with school projects, where scraped knees were soothed with cookies and advice. I looked at each of them carefully, slowly. They were scared, not just of what Richard was doing but of me, of what I'd become. "I want to apologize," I said, breaking the silence. "Not for leaving. Had to do that. But for not explaining it better. I should have told you I was safe sooner." Ivy looked up for the first time. Her voice was soft. "Why did you go?" It was the first time she'd spoken directly to me since I returned. I took a deep breath. "Because I realized I wasn't living. I was functioning. I looked at myself through your eyes, and I wasn't a person anymore. I was a convenience. Someone who set up parties, cleaned up afterward, and disappeared before the important people arrived." Guilt flickered across their faces. "The day of Ivy's promotion party," I continued, "I realized I'd spent my entire adult life being useful to everyone but myself, and I needed to know who I was without that role. So you just left." Ivy's voice cracked. "Like that?" "Yes," I said simply. "I chose myself. Maybe for the first time ever." They were quiet for a long moment. "We were awful to you," Jean finally said, the words slow and thick. "About the party. And not just the party," Leah added. "We've taken you for granted for years." I reached across the table and took their hands. "I'm not asking for apologies. I just want us to move forward. I want to be your mother, but I also need to be Grace. Does that make sense?" They nodded slowly, though I could see it would take time to fully understand. "Now," I said, sitting back, "tell me everything. What has your father been saying?" They looked at each other. Then the dam broke. Jean started. He showed up at Ivy's apartment the night of the party, acting like he was just concerned. Leah took over. At first, he helped us try to contact you. He looked genuinely worried. Then when we didn't hear from you, he started planting ideas. He said you'd been acting strangely, Ivy whispered. Talking about escaping. Feeling trapped. He told us, that maybe you were having memory issues. He said his aunt had early onset dementia, Jean added. That she acted erratically too. Clenched my jaw. Richard. Always so clever at twisting the truth. Always planting seeds of doubt and watching them bloom into chaos. When did he move into the house? Asked. About 2 weeks after you left, Ivy answered. He said he was just protecting the property. But then he started talking about how you'd forfeited your rights to it. And last week, Leah said slowly, he started saying the divorce settlement could be challenged. That you weren't mentally competent when you signed it. I couldn't help myself, I laughed. He's getting desperate, I said. Very creative. But it won't hold up. The room relaxed slightly. What are you going to do, Mom? Jean asked. I smiled, feeling calm, even as the storm raged around us. First, I'm calling Jason Reynolds. Then I'm changing the locks. And tonight we're having dinner. Just the 4 of us. I want to show you the pictures I took in Portugal. And that's exactly what I did. While Jason reassured me over the phone that Richard had no legal standing and promised to send a formal cease and desist, I called a locksmith. By mid-afternoon, every lock in the house had been changed. Aired out the rooms. Tossed out the empty bottles. Let sunlight pour through every dusty window. Later, as I trimmed back weeds in the garden, my phone rang. Unknown number. Hello. Grace, it's Linda. Linda Peterson. Froze. Linda had been my best friend. Until Richard. When he left me, she slowly distanced herself. I hadn't spoken to her in years. What do you want? I asked, my tone colder than I intended. I think we need to talk. About Richard. My grip tightened on the shears. I'm listening. Not over the phone. Can I come over? Every instinct told me to say no. She had turned her back on me when I needed her most. But curiosity won out. Fine, I said. Now's a good time. 30 minutes later, Linda sat at my kitchen table. Hands folded, eyes darting. You look different, she said carefully. Stronger. I am, I said. And then she told me something that made my blood run cold. Richard came to our house last night, she began. He's trying to convince Mike to testify that you were unstable. Even before the divorce. He reminded Mike of a loan he helped secure for the practice years ago. I leaned back in my chair. The pieces fell into place. Richard had been weaving this net for years, collecting favors, leverage, secrets. He's desperate, Linda added. His second wife left him last year. Took everything. His business is falling apart. And now he's trying to take my house, I finished. She nodded. And your name. Your sanity. Whatever he can. Why tell me now, Linda? Asked. Why help me after all this time? She hesitated. Because when I heard you went to Portugal, alone, I realized I could never do what you did. I admire you, Grace. I really do. When she left, I sat in the garden for a long time. Richard had underestimated me. Again. But this time I wasn't going to fold. And this time I wasn't alone. That evening, the girls returned just as the sun was setting. The living room still held the scent of fresh air and lavender from the candles I'd lit, trying to erase the staleness Richard had left behind. They came in quietly, cautiously, but with a sense of purpose. We sat around the table once again, this time not as a broken group of strained relatives, but as women ready to face truth head-on. I didn't waste time. I shared everything Linda had told me. About Richard's visit. About the threats. About how he was planning to use old favors and false narratives to paint me as unstable. The girls were stunned. Jean's face twisted in anger. I can't believe he's dragging Mike into this. That's disgusting. Leah looked sick. He's been planning this all along. I turned to Ivy, who sat quietly, her eyes downcast. Something in her posture felt too still, too rehearsed. Ivy asked gently, "Is there something you haven't told me?" She hesitated, and when she finally looked up, there were tears in her eyes. "I'm so sorry, Mom," she whispered. "I never meant to hurt you." Froze. "What are you talking about?" And then she told me. She'd been meeting Richard in secret. Not just once. Over the past year. It had started with a simple congratulatory message he sent after her company highlighted her in their newsletter. He was proud of her, he said. He wanted to know more about her work. About her dreams. The things he'd never cared to ask about before. "I thought he'd changed," she said. "I thought maybe he wanted to know me this time." The words hit me like a blow, but I kept my voice calm. "Go on." They started meeting regularly. Coffee every few weeks. Conversations about her future. Career advice. He offered to introduce her to people, help her move up. And then he suggested the promotion party. "He said I deserved to be celebrated," she said, voice cracking. "And that it would be awkward if you were there. He said you wouldn't be comfortable with his associates. So excluding me, that was his idea." "Yes." She nodded. "I knew it was wrong. But I didn't want to mess up the opportunity. I thought he was helping me." "And was he even planning to come to the party?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "No," she whispered. "He never showed. None of his connections did. It was a disaster even before we realized you were gone." I felt cold, like the floor had been ripped from beneath me again. He'd used her. Used all of us. Turned my daughter into a pawn to humiliate me. "I'm so sorry, Mom," she said again. I was desperate for his approval. And he knew it. I reached across the table and took her hand. "You're not the first person he's manipulated. And unfortunately, you won't be the last. But Ivy, your worth doesn't come from his opinion. Or mine. It comes from within you." She gave me a watery smile. "That sounds like something the new you would say." "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe the old me just never had the courage to say it out loud." We sat in silence for a moment before she asked the question we were all circling. "What are you going to do about Dad?" "About the house." I looked at all three of them. For the first time they looked ready, not just to listen but to act. "I'm going to fight," I said. "But I won't do it alone. The question is, what are you going to do?" Ivy straightened her back. "I'm going to stand with you. And I'm going to tell Jean and Leah everything." "Not just them," I said. "We'll tell everyone. No more secrets in this family." That evening we gathered again. All four of us. Ivy told the full truth. Leah and Jean were hurt, yes, but not surprised. Richard had manipulated them in different ways over the years. This was just his latest performance. "He told me you were thinking of selling the house," Jean admitted. "Said you talked about it before you left." "He told me you'd been forgetting things," Leah added. "Acting erratically." We sat there in stunned silence, piecing it all together. Richard hadn't just lied. He had built an entire story. Months in the making. Grooming each of us, separately, planting doubts and distortions, just waiting for the right moment to move. "But why?" Vi asked. "What does he gain?" "The house," I said simply. "But it's not worth all this," Jean said, confused. "It's not some kind of mansion." "No," I said slowly. "But the land." Richard had always said this property would be worth a fortune one day, if the town expanded this far. Leah's eyes widened. "They just announced that new development. The one with the tech companies. It's only 2 blocks from here." He nodded. "Which makes this land very attractive. Especially to someone who's lost everything and is desperate to rebuild." Realization settled over the room like fog. This wasn't just about revenge. This was about greed. "So what do we do now?" Vi asked. I looked at each of them, strong, capable, and finally truly by my side. Now, I said, we end this. The plan came together faster than I expected. Maybe because, for the first time in years, we were working as a team. Me and my daughters standing side by side. Jason, my divorce attorney, was sharp as ever. He reviewed everything Richard had said, every message, every legal threat, and started preparing documentation to shut it all down. But what made the real difference was Linda. She came through, handing over text messages Richard had sent her husband Mike, pressuring him to testify, threatening to expose some long-buried issue that could ruin his medical career. Jason called it coercion. I called it exactly what it was. Richard being Richard. The girls did their part too. Jean tracked down emails Richard had sent under the guise of protecting family interests. Leah found voicemails he'd left after I was gone. Calculated, rehearsed lies meant to shift the blame. But it was Ivy who had the final blow. "I've been recording our conversations," she told me. At first because I liked his advice. Later, because I didn't trust him anymore. She handed over hours of audio. Not just vague conversations but direct proof. Richard admitting he wanted the house. Richard suggesting the settlement could be reopened if I was labeled unstable. Richard laughing about how easily he'd turned my daughters against me. 1 week later we invited him over. He arrived, lawyer in tow, expecting a negotiation. Expecting me to cave. I watched from the porch as he stepped out of the car, adjusting his cufflinks like he still had power here. He had no idea. Inside the living room, Jason sat beside me, folders stacked neatly in front of him. Ivy, Jean, and Leah sat to my left. Linda and Mike to the right. And just behind them, 2 police officers, calmly observing. Richard walked in and froze. "What is this?" he asked, scanning the room. Jason stood up smoothly. "A choice," he said. "You can walk away, Richard. Today. No more threats. No more contact. No more attempts to manipulate this family. Or we proceed with charges. Harassment, attempted fraud, trespassing. Your choice." Richard scoffed. "You can't prove anything." Ivy stood. "Actually, we can." She pulled out her phone. "I've been recording you for months." Silence. You could hear the tick of the wall clock. Richard's face collapsed in on itself, all pretense and pride draining out of him. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. He looked smaller, weaker, sadder than I ever remembered him being. He glanced at me. And for the first time in decades, he really looked at me. "You've changed," he said quietly. "Yes," I answered. "I have." Jason stepped forward. "So, what's it going to be?" Richard didn't respond. He just turned, nodded once to his lawyer, and left the house without another word. We watched them drive off, disappearing down the same street he'd once left us from years ago. Leah turned to me. "Do you think he'll come back?" "No," I said, the certainty like a stone in my chest. "He knows when he's beaten." That night, after everyone left, I sat alone in the garden. The air was warm, the sky above scattered with stars. I looked at the overgrown plants, the stone path I'd once laid with my own hands, the roses climbing wild along the fence. I thought about the woman I used to be, the one who kept her head down, who apologized for taking up space, who settled for being needed but never seen. And then I thought about the woman I was becoming. I knew there would be days I'd slip. Days I'd hear the old voice whisper, "Stay small, don't make noise, be useful." But I also knew I had found something stronger. The next morning I woke early. I made coffee, picked up my camera. The sun was rising, painting the world gold. I walked barefoot into the garden and began taking pictures. Not of perfection but of progress. Weeds and all. And for the first time it felt like mine. The week that followed felt like breathing fresh air after years spent underwater. Jason called the next day to confirm the restraining order had been officially filed. The house deed, already in my name, was now beyond challenge. Richard wouldn't be bothering me again. Not legally, not emotionally, not in any way that mattered. Relief came slowly, like sunlight through fog. I wasn't used to quiet without tension, stillness without guilt. But I embraced it anyway. I registered for a photography class at the community college. It was something I'd once only daydreamed about, standing in supermarket lines or folding laundry. Now it was real. I also called a contractor and began making arrangements to turn the spare bedroom into a darkroom. My steps. Sunday came, and with it something new. We'd started a rotation for Sunday dinners, and this time it was at Leah's place. The girls had insisted. I was the guest. No cooking. No setting up. No cleanup. I was skeptical, but I showed up anyway. The moment I walked in, Ivy pulled me into a hug. "You're really here," she said. "And not carrying a cake or a platter." "Nope," I smiled. "Just me." We sat around the table like we used to, but something was different. The tension was gone. The performance was gone. We were just us. After dessert, Ivy pulled out her phone and showed me the pictures I had taken of Leah's kids at the park last week. Carefree moments I'd snapped without even thinking. "They're incredible," she said. "You captured something real." I looked at the screen and saw what she saw. It wasn't just a hobby anymore. It was a skill. Vision. A piece of me that had waited too long to be seen. Then Ivy hesitated. "There's something I need to ask you," she said. We were sitting on Leah's back porch now, coffee mugs in hand, the sky soft with the colors of an ending day. "Anything," I said. "Would you consider taking family portraits for us? Professionally, I mean. We'd pay you, of course." Blinked. "You want me to take your pictures?" She nodded eagerly. "Your work is amazing, Mom. And you know us, you get it. You see us." I felt warmth bloom in my chest. For so long I'd been invisible. Now they not only saw me, they respected me, trusted me. "I'd be honored," I said, my voice catching. "But no payment. This one's on me." Ivy grinned, visibly relieved. But then she hesitated again. "There's one more thing." Waited. "I'm being considered for a position in the Lisbon office. It's a big promotion. A chance to build something new." I couldn't hide my joy. "Lisbon." She nodded. "But I'm scared. It's far. I don't know anyone there. My Portuguese is awful." I reached for her hand and held it tightly. "I happen to know the most wonderful little pension in Alfama, with a view of the Tejo River. And if you go, I'll visit. Often." She laughed, tears in her eyes. "I was hoping you'd say that." As we sat there in silence, watching the sky shift from coral to deep blue, I felt something settle inside me. Deep, quiet peace. My life hadn't gone as planned. My marriage had failed. I had made mistakes, some big, some quiet. I had lost myself somewhere in the years of giving and doing and disappearing. But by choosing myself that day, by walking away from a party I wasn't welcome at and onto a plane bound for a place I'd only dreamed of, I found my way back. Not to the woman I was, but to the woman I could become. Not perfect, not polished, but real. And in that realness, I had discovered something powerful. When I honored my own worth, others began to honor it too. As the stars began to dot the sky above us, I picked up my camera one last time that evening and captured one more moment. Our hands, mine and Ivy's, resting side by side on the porch railing. The last light of sunset glowed gently across our skin. Mother and daughter, different but connected, both choosing our own paths forward, both finally fully seen.